This case is not only about the crucifix, it's also about the tension between individual rights and collective identity, the tension between the role of courts and of political democratic institutions, and the tension between the uniform values which the convention system espouses and the rich diversity that characterizes the European legal landscape. In its decision, the Chamber articulated three key principles, with two of which the intervening states strongly agree, and from the last one of which they strongly dissent. They agree that the Convention guarantees individual freedom of religion and freedom from religion, positive and negative religious freedom. Nobody should be coerced into any religious practice. And they also strongly agree that there is a need for the classroom in our schools to educate towards tolerance and pluralism. But the Chamber also articulated a principle of neutrality. I'm going to quote from the Chamber. The state's duty of neutrality and impartiality is incompatible with any kind of power on its part to assess the legitimacy of religious convictions or the way of expressing those convictions. Unquote. From this premise, the conclusion was inevitable. Having a crucifix on the wall of a classroom was obviously found to express an assessment of the legitimacy of a religious conviction, Christianity, and hence, according to that principle of neutrality, violative. However, in our respectful submission, that formulation of neutrality was based on two conceptual errors, which also undermine the conclusion. The first conceptual error had to do with failing to distinguish between private rights and public identity. Under the Convention system, it is indeed the case that all members must guarantee the individual freedom of religion, including the freedom from religion. This obligation represents a common constitutional asset of Europe. In that respect, we are all one. In all our countries, freedom of religion and freedom from religion must be respected. However, it is counterbalanced with considerable liberty which the Convention system allows as to the place of religion and religious heritage and religious symbols in the definition of the collective identity of the nation and the state and its public spaces. I will demonstrate this liberty. On the one hand, there are members in which laïcité is part of the very definition of the state, as in France, in Article 1 of its constitution, and in which, indeed, following the principle of laïcité, there cannot be any state-endorsed or sponsored religious symbol in a public space. Laïcité holds as a political doctrine that religion is a matter for private space. It is a private affair. However, just across the channel from France, we find England, and I use this term advisedly, in which there is an established state church, the Church of England, in which the head of state is also the head of the church, in which religious leaders are ex officio members of the legislative branch, in which the flag carries the cross, and in which the national anthem is a prayer to God to save the monarch and to give him or her victory and glory. Sometimes God does not listen, as happened a few days ago in South Africa on the Green football match. In its very definition as a state with an established church, in its very ontology, what it means to be England and what it means to be English, England would appear to violate the strictures of the Chambers. For how could we say that all those symbols which I've mentioned, the head of state, the head of the church, the cross, the anthem, etc., do not represent some kind of assessment of the legitimacy of religious belief? There is a huge diversity of state-church arrangements in Europe. More than half the population of Europe lives in states which could not be described as laïque. Now, inevitably, in public education, the state and its symbols have a place, and they should have a place, because it's in the interest of democracy that there is social cohesion, that people in society feel as belonging to one nation. If there is no sense of demos, Your Honours, there cannot be democracy. So the state and its symbols are essential to our democracy. However, the problem is that many of our state symbols, because of Europe's history, a history for hundreds and thousands of years intertwined with Christianity, have a religious dimension to it. We cannot undo our history. The cross is, of course, the most visible example, appearing on endless flags, crests, buildings, currency, etc. It is not the case that the cross is only a national symbol, as some people would hold. That is nonsense. The cross is a national symbol and a religious symbol. It is not only a religious symbol, it is also, in many countries, maybe not in all, a national symbol. It is both, and it's understandable. There are some scholars, Your Honours, which claim that the flag of the Council of Europe with the 12 stars reflects the same duality, religious and secular. But let's put the cross aside. Let's imagine an English classroom where hangs a photograph of the Queen of England, the monarch. Like the cross, this photograph of the Queen, which might hang in a classroom in England, represents two things. It represents the photo of the head of state. It also represents the photo of the titular head of the Church of England, a little bit like the Pope. Could we accept that a student would come into his or her English class and say, because of my individual right of religion, because I am, say, a Catholic and not a Church of England, not a Protestant, because I am a Jew, because I am a Muslim, or because of my philosophical conviction, because I'm an atheist, please remove the picture of the Queen of England from our classroom? I don't think so. I don't think so. I could say more. Could it be or would it be prohibited to hang a copy of the Irish Constitution or of the German Constitution in an Irish classroom or in a German classroom, or indeed to read the Irish Constitution or to read the German Constitution in an Irish classroom or a German classroom, because in the Irish Constitution, in its preamble, there's reference to the Holy Trinity and the divine Lord Jesus Christ, and the German Constitution opens with the words concerning our responsibility before God. Surely, we cannot require our students in school to engage in a religious act. If we sing the national anthem in a British school, surely we should allow an English student not to sing God Save the Queen if that offends his or her sensibility to mention the name of God. But we should not require all other students not to sing the national anthems. This European arrangement, guaranteeing individual freedom of religion and freedom from religion, coupled with the rich diversity in the public space of the arrangement of church and state, constitutes a huge lesson in pluralism and tolerance. Every child in Europe, atheist and religion, or agnostic, Christian, Muslim, and Jew, learns that as part of their European heritage, Europe insists, on the one hand, on their individual right to worship freely, of course within limits of respecting other people's rights and public order, and their right not to worship at all. It cannot be a qualification for public office that you hold a certain religion or that you do not hold a certain religion, etc. At the same time, as part of its pluralism and tolerance, Europe accepts and respects both a France and an England, a Sweden, which divested itself of the official church, and a Denmark, where there is still an official church, the Lutheran Church, a Greece and an Italy, all of which have very different practices of acknowledging publicly endorsed religious symbols by the state and in public spaces. That diversity, those different traditions, accepting and respecting them in the sense of Article 2, is part of the tolerance and pluralism that we want to teach our children. Now, make no mistake, Your Honours, in many of these non-laic states, large segments of the population, maybe even a majority, are no longer religious themselves. And yet, the continued entanglement of religious symbols in its public space and by the state is accepted by the secular population as part of their national identity. I am sure that the thousands or tens of thousands singing with gusto, "God Save the Queen," many of them do not believe in God. But they would be appalled if somebody came and said, "You have to change the British national anthem." It is part of their identity of being British. Now, it might be that someday the British or the English will change their mind and decide that they want to disestablish the church, change the anthem, redraw their flag, etc. It is their democratic and constitutional right to do that. But it's for them to do, not for this distinguished court. And the convention certainly does not require them to do that. Italy has the right to be and choose to be a laic state. And I don't think this court should be invited to interpret the Italian constitution and to impose the strictures of the Italian constitution on Italy. Leave that job to the Italian courts. Italy has the right, if it wants, to be a laic state. But what Lao Tzu would have this court do is to impose on it the duty to be a laic state. That cannot be. That is not a correct interpretation of this convention. There is no duty of laicite on the members of the European Convention on Human Rights. In today's Europe, countries have opened their gates to many new residents and citizens. We owe them all the guarantees of the Convention. We owe them the decency and welcome. We owe them non-discrimination. But the message of tolerance towards the other should not be translated into a message of intolerance towards one's own identity. And the legal imperative of the Convention should not extend the justified requirement that the state guarantee negative and positive religious freedom to the unjustified and startling proposition that the state divest itself of part of its cultural identity simply because the artifacts of such identity may be religious or of religious origin. The position adopted by the Chamber in its decision is not an expression of the pluralism that it advocates. It is an expression of the values of the laic state. I respect the laic state. I respect people who want to live in a laic state. But I also respect people who do not want to live in a laic state. To extend those principles to the whole members of the convention system would be, with great respect, the Americanization of Europe. Americanization in two respects. First of all, a single rule for everybody, instead of the proud, correctly proud, European tradition of constitutional diversity. And secondly, a rigid American style of separation of church and state, as if the peoples of Europe who are non-laic, the English and the Maltese and the Greek and the many others, cannot be trusted, even though they have opted for a non-laic option for their state, to live by the principle of tolerance and pluralism and non-discrimination that are part of the European tradition. The Europe of the Convention represents a unique balance between individual liberty of and from religion and the collective liberty to define the state and nation using religious symbols and even having an established church. We trust our constitutional democratic institutions to define our public spaces and our collective educational system. We trust our courts, including list august courts, to defend the individual liberty. It's a balance that has served Europe well. We have had religious peace for the duration of the convention system. We should not change it lightly. It is also a balance which could act as a beacon for the world. Europe leads by example. It does not lead by force. There is a view out there in the rest of the world that if you want to be democratic, you cannot be religious. You have to consign religion to the private sphere. That is the American position. That is not the European position, unless you follow the Chamber in Laozi. The European position is that you have to respect freedom of religion and freedom from religion. But the state, like in England, like a Malta, like a Greece, like many others, can still define itself by reference to its religious heritage. It's a noble example which can offer opportunities for others to follow in our lead. Very briefly, President, if I may, I want to say something about laicite. Today, the social cleavage in our society is not among Jews and Christians. It is not among Protestant and Catholics. It's among religious and non-religious. Laicite, as I said, is a noble tradition of the French Revolution. It is a position which says that religion is a private affair and should be respected as a private affair according to liberty of conscience. That is fine. It is in contrast to the other political position which says, no, even in a democracy, even in a liberal democracy, religion can be part of public life, whereas at the same time, we can respect freedom of religion and freedom from religion. There is nothing neutral in the laic position. I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's not neutral. It is a binary world with those on the one hand that believe that religion is a private affair and those who believe that religion can have a place in public space. Now allow me to read my parable about Giovanni and Marco. These are two friends. They just about to go to school, as we heard. Giovanni and Marco. or Leonardo and Marco, better still. Leonardo goes to the house of Marco and he sees a crucifix. He says, "What is this?" Marco says to him, "You don't have a crucifix? How can you live in a house without a crucifix?" He runs home and he says to his mother, "How can we live in a house without a crucifix?" She says to him, "Don't worry, they are Catholics, we respect them, but we have a different worldview, a good worldview, a respectable worldview." Reverse the role. Marco goes to the house of Leonardo. "Where's your crucifix?" he asks. Leonardo says, "Oh, forget about the crucifix. That's old wives' tales, prejudices, antique stuff. We live by Socrates." Leonardo runs home and says, "Why do we have a crucifix? It's old wives' tales." His mother says, "Relax. We believe in God, we believe in our Savior, and we respect people who don't believe." Now they go to school. Two hypotheses. They arrive in the school and there's a crucifix on the wall. Obviously, Leonardo will run home and say to his mother, "You see, the school also has a crucifix." Hypothesis two, they arrive at the school and there's no crucifix. Marco will run home and you say, "You see, the school doesn't have a crucifix. Old wives' tales." Laicite is no more neutral than a religious worldview. How do we resolve this issue? We resolve it by teaching tolerance. The French, with the naked wall, have in their curriculum to teach their children respect for religious people and for different religions. Countries like Italy, who choose to have a crucifix as part of the very way and identity and self-understanding, have to teach their children respect for those who do not believe, for those who are agnostic or atheists. France with the crucifix on the wall is not a France. Italy with the crucifix on the wall is not an Italy. Let's not change that. Thank you.